Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about Japan and Southeast Asia, specifically Vietnam and Angkor, or Cambodia. But first, let's review. What two products were brought from Africa to China? Gold and ivory. Now, what were the two different classes that Chinese society was divided into? The nobility and the lower classes. Now, who made up the lower classes? The farmers and artisans, scientists, military, and merchants. Now, what were the three exams that could be taken to obtain a government office? The local exam, the provincial exam, and the imperial exam. Who was allowed to take the exam? Anyone, if they could afford it, except the merchants. Now, why weren't the merchants allowed to take the exam? Because they were considered the bottom rung of society. Now, why were they thought of so poorly? Because the teachings of Confucianism condemned the practice of making a profit, which is what the merchants did. And what changed that allowed the merchants to take the exam? The Song dynasty came into power, and they wanted to check the power of the nobility. Now, they changed the laws against merchants owning property and taking the exams to get government offices. Now, how did the rise of the merchant class help the average Chinese person? Well, they produced wealth, factories were built, and jobs created for the lower classes. Towns and cities multiplied to provide hubs for trade, both near and far. Now, the common people began enjoying products that were previously reserved only for the nobility. Now, who was the founder of Taoism? Lao Tzu. Now, what was the name of the symbol that explained the principles of opposites? Yin Yang. Now, who was affected the most by Taoism? The peasants. Now, who founded Confucianism? Confuzi or Confucius. Now, what does Confucius mean? Supreme sage. Now, what are the two concepts of Confucianism that must be in harmony? Li and Ren. Now, what are the 5 relationships in Confucianism? Ruler to ruled, father to son, husband to wife, older brother to younger brother, and friend to friend. Now, Confucius became a god to the masses, but his teachings were really embraced by what group of people? The nobility. Why? Confucianism called for people to stay in the class that they were born into by keeping the 5 relationships. Now, who founded Buddhism? Siddhartha Gautama, or Buddha. Now, what does Buddha mean? Awakened one. And what is Buddhism based on? The 4 Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. And how did the Chinese people respond to Buddhism? They blended it with Confucianism and Taoism. Now, why did almost every home in ancient China have an altar where they burned incense? The incense was burned to their ancestors so that they could bless them and guide them. They were very much into ancestor worship. Okay, great review. Let's talk about Japan and Southeast Asia.
Welcome, Agent 41. Good work on the last case. Your new mission is Operation Flaming Sushi. Kumiko Nishimura is charged with arson. Last night, she torched a sushi bar in Tokyo called Yamasato. Although several people received minor burns, no one was seriously injured or killed. But that was number 6 in a chain of restaurants she's burned down. We did a background check on Nishimura and her family. Her father worked at Yamasato as a chef until a year ago when he was fired for insubordination. The daughter seems to be on an extreme revenge kick. You must find this avenging arsonist before she does any more damage or kills anyone. Now for a few geographical details. As you know, Japan is an island chain. It is surrounded to the east by the North Pacific Ocean and to the west by the Sea of Japan. Tokyo is the capital, and with over 36 million people, it is the largest population of any city in the world. That, and the fact that all 6 of the restaurants Nishimura has burnt down were in Tokyo, lead us to target the city as her most likely hideout. Other than in the cities, Japan's topography is mostly mountainous with several active volcanoes. The most famous volcano is Mount Fuji, located southwest of Tokyo. Japan's climate ranges from a cooler, temperate climate in the north to a tropical climate in the south. Now for your alias. You will be an American tourist who has come to experience Japan, eat sushi, and climb Mount Fuji. In fact, after you apprehend Nishimura, you may want to try it. Climbing Mount Fuji, I mean. I hear the view's worthwhile. Anyway, your flight for Tokyo leaves in 1 hour. Check in when you land. Farewell, Agent 41.
Japan is very much a mixture of different cultures. They were influenced by the Chinese, Korea, and the West. So there really isn't much known about Japan until about the 1st century AD. That was when the people of Wa, or Japan, were first mentioned in Chinese chronicles, and even then, there wasn't a lot known about them. What we do know is that there were different clans that were led by chiefs that led the spiritual life of the tribe. Each tribe worshipped a kami. A kami was a god or a nature spirit that represented something in nature. Now, we also know that eventually there was a shift from emphasis on religious leadership to military leadership among the chiefs, probably during the 4th or 5th centuries. Now, this is where historians disagree. Some historians believe that an outside invader made the chiefs shift to military leadership and unify to defend an invader, maybe as early as the 3rd century. Others believe that a clan from the area of the Yamato started overthrowing the other clans over a period of time until all of Japan was unified under the leadership of the Yamato chief. But whatever happened, we do know that sometime before the 8th century, all of the clans of Japan were united and had come to respect the chief of the Yamato, because he was supposedly a direct descendant of the sun goddess Amaterasu. Now, the chiefs of the Yamato clan eventually became known as emperor and established the longest hereditary monarchy in the world to this day. The term emperor of the rising sun was used as an opposite of China's term emperor of the setting sun around the 7th or 8th century. Now, even though the Yamato clan became known as the emperor and all the people of Japan looked to him or his or her direct descendants as direct descendants of the sun goddess, different clans came to power to either aid or dominate the emperor, depending on how you look at it. Now, the first family to really become dominant was the Fujiwara clan. Now, there really isn't any specific start to the influence of the Fujiwara. The founder of the clan helped the new emperor in 645 when he and his family overthrew the influential family, the Soga, that had been dominating the emperor. Now, the emperor turned around and gave the leader of the coup the title of Fujiwara, which became the clan's name. Now, the emperor then asked for help in reforming the government. This reform became known as the Taika reform. Now, Taika means great change. This led to a more Chinese-style government, like the emperor was to be considered ruler over the entire land, and the land was divided into provinces, districts, and villages run by governors responsible to the emperor. And a centralized tax system was created as well. Now, eventually, the capital was moved to Kyoto, which was the stronghold of the Fujiwara. Now, the Fujiwaras influenced the emperor and the government for around the middle of the 7th century until the 12th century. Now, you might be asking, how in the world would one family stay in power for that long without being challenged by the emperor? Well, what they did was that their daughters of the leaders of the family would be married to the emperors and the emperor's brothers, etc. One of the leaders of the family was the grandfather of 3 emperors and father to 6 wives of other emperors. Needless to say, he had a great deal of influence on what took place in the government. Eventually, though, the Fujiwara lost control of the regency. In 1192, the Fujiwara lost power and Yoritomo, a leader of the Minamoto clan, took power. He ruled from Kamakura, which was where the term Kamakura period came from. Now, Yoritomo was given the title shogun from the emperor. Now, the title shogun meant great general. Japan became more of a warrior state with constant fighting between the clans. This would continue until an outside threat, the Mongols, would cause the clans to put aside their differences and unite to defend their nation. Now, after the Mongols were prevented from invading Japan, the clans went right back to fighting. Now, during this period, the strong central government declined, which caused Japan to begin practicing feudalism. Now, you may have learned about feudalism in medieval Europe, which actually was going on around the same time. We'll actually talk about that next chapter. Now, Japanese and European feudalism were very similar. So the emperor was at the top, in charge, so to speak. Now, there were emperors that were in charge, but they were very few and far between. The shoguns were really the ones in charge. Now, the shoguns was a hereditary position. After Yoritomo died, his wife's family came in and assassinated all of his sons and heirs and took up the shogunate. Now, the daimyos would answer to the shoguns. The daimyos were the lords that oversaw regions and estates throughout Japan. They had economic and military power to keep the people in line. They controlled the people by hiring the samurai. Now, the samurai were warriors that we will discuss in a few minutes, but they answered to the daimyos. Now, the artisans, merchants, and peasants all answered to the samurai. So let's say that there was an emperor that wasn't really in charge. He was more into, let's say, the arts. So the shogun ran the country, and he decided that there needed to be a new palace built for someone. So he would go to the emperor and request that taxes be collected, and the emperor would, of course, okay it. Then the shogun would then tell all the daimyos to make sure that they collected the taxes that were needed. The daimyos would then tell the samurai to go and collect the taxes so that the daimyos could give them to the shogun. The samurai would then go and collect the taxes from the people. Now, that is obviously a very simplistic view of feudalism, but that's really how it would work. So, after about 150 years of Kamakura's shogunate, after the attempted invasion of the Mongols, the Kamakura started to lose the loyalty of the daimyos. The emperor, who didn't like being told what to do, encouraged the daimyos to rebel. The Kamakura shogun then asked the Ashikaga daimyo, who was very powerful, to help him repress the rebellion. But the Ashikaga had been relatives of Yoritomo, and probably in retaliation of all of his sons being murdered, actually sided with the emperor and destroyed the Kamakura. The emperor then placed the Ashikaga as the shogunate. This started the Ashikaga period. Eventually, the Ashikaga became weak and the shogunate was taken over by the Tokugawa clan, or period. They moved the capital from Kyoto to Edo, which became known as Tokyo. This was the final shogunate period before the Meiji Restoration, which did away with the feudal system and restored imperial power. Now, with the rise of the office of shogun, the samurai warrior became the leader of Japanese society. So let's talk about the samurai, or bushi, which is another name for samurai. Almost from birth, the samurai were trained in all methods of fighting and scholastics. They learned to fight both on foot and on horseback. They had to become proficient in archery, polearms, jujitsu, and the sword. They were trained in history in order to appreciate the culture that they were fighting to protect and understand how previous wars were won or lost. They also were taught literature to help them appreciate the less tangible aspects of culture and to broaden their understanding of abstract thought. Writing, especially calligraphy, was an essential tool for communication. At the very least, writing instructions for battle plans or important information about troop movements could mean the difference between victory and defeat for the samurai. Now, religion, etiquette, medicine, poetry, and astronomy were also very important subjects that the samurai were taught. Now, the Japanese samurai was bound by the written code of the Bushido, or the way of the warrior. This code required the warrior to display traits such as loyalty, honor, duty, and courage. Now, you need to understand that the loyalty, honor, duty, and courage that the samurai was taught were probably different than the types of loyalty, honor, duty, and courage that you have been taught. In other words, if two samurai were fighting and one is defeated, then the winning samurai must give the defeated samurai the right to commit suicide, or harikiri. Now, if the samurai doesn't commit suicide, then the victorious samurai was bound by code to kill him. It was considered courageous for the samurai to commit suicide. Now, another example is that if someone ever touched the sword of a samurai, then the samurai was bound by code or honor to kill that person. The samurai must give total loyalty to his daimyo, no matter what he is asked to do. For him to disobey an order means total dishonor. The only other choice that he has is to commit harikiri, or suicide. Now, understand, harikiri wasn't just a random act. It was very methodical. There were certain methods and procedures that they had to follow. The dying samurai often chose someone to finish the deed, since he had to stay alert to fulfill the procedure until the end. This code would create a loyalty to the daimyos that led to the endurance of feudalism until the 1870s. So let's talk about the religion of Japan. The two major religions in Japan are Shintoism and Zen Buddhism. Shinto really didn't have a clear beginning with a specific founder. The first evidence of Shinto was the book of the Kajiki, which established the Japanese imperial family as descendants of the sun goddess. You see, Shintoism is a form of nature worship. All things in nature possessed deity or are spirits. We talked earlier about the tribal kamais, which all things in nature are kamais. Now, part of Shinto is the belief that the sun is a goddess and that the emperor is a descendant of the sun goddess. Shintoism inspired devotion to the homeland and the worship of the emperor as a god. Now, we know that God created all things to glorify himself. When you go outside and look around, you see God's handiwork everywhere. Nature is amazing, and even takes your breath away. Now, the Japanese only looked at nature and couldn't help but see that it was pointing to a deity. Since they didn't know who the creator God was, they just created their own deities. Really sad, isn't it? Now, the other Japanese religion is Zen Buddhism. Now, Zen Buddhism is basically an extension of Buddhism, which came to Japan at the end of the 12th century. Basically, Zen Buddhists have the same belief in suffering and meditation that the regular Buddhists have. But Zen requires its followers to develop intense mental concentration and self-control, spending hours, if not days, in deep meditation. Now, Zen Buddhists had a huge impact on the military class, especially the samurai. You see, the deep concentration and self-control was very useful in learning the different arts that were important to the samurai. The concentration and self-control gave the samurai the ability to endure hardships in battle and could be the difference between victory or defeat on that battlefield. Zen believes that he is in control of his own destiny if he has enough self-control and can meditate long enough. You can see this in the fact that the samurai would rather kill themselves, be in control of their own death, rather than let anyone else be in control. But we are nothing in and of ourselves. We cannot control what happens. God is in control of all things, and everything that happens is according to His glory and our good. Many people fight to keep control of their destiny, not trusting God to be in control. But God does just such a better job than I could ever do when I allow Him to lead me and I don't fight His will. So let's talk about Southeast Asia. Not much is known about the history of Vietnam. We do know that there are many legends about the early history until the written history, which was when the Chinese took over Vietnam or parts of Vietnam. Eventually, two different kingdoms were established in the area bordering the South China Sea. The kingdom of the north was called Dien Viet. The other was Champa. Now, Dien Viet formed after the Lai dynasty took control of the imperial throne about 60 years after the area of North Vietnam had won independence from China. The dynasty started after a palace guard was elected to take the throne after a dictatorial emperor had died at the age of 24 after living a short life that seemed strangely similar to the Roman Emperor Nero. Now, Lai established the Dien Viet, which actually means Great Viet. He moved the capital to Hanoi, changed the country from focusing on military to defense to economic growth. He also started the first university in Vietnam, realizing that education would improve the nation as a whole. Now in the south, there was the Kingdom of Champa. They controlled the trade between all of the countries in Asia, like China, Indonesia, and India, with the Muslim Middle East. They were very wealthy. Now, Champa and Dien Viet fought each other at every opportunity. One time, it would be the Champas invading the Dien Viet. Then the Dien Viet would invade the Champas. This went on for centuries until 1471, when troops from Dien Viet invaded and destroyed the capital of Champa. Eventually, Dien Viet and Champa merged into Vietnam. Now, Cambodia was influenced by India and China from around the 3rd century AD and beyond. But around the 9th century, an empire known as Khmer developed in this region around the same time as the Dien Viet and the Champa. Now, the city of Angkor served as Khmer's center of influence. There were many different capital cities and thousands of temples that were built by the Khmer. The most famous of the Khmer temples was the Angkor Wat, which is still a practicing Buddhist temple. Some sources say that the Kingdom of Khmer had one of the largest urban centers in the world at that time. Eventually, Angkor was defeated and sacked by the Thai and abandoned within 50 years of the destruction of the capital of Champa. The Thai and the Vietnamese would control Cambodia over the next several hundred years. Okay, wow, we flew through that information, and I know that there was a lot, but it's fascinating how you can see great civilizations develop throughout the world and see how they would continue to try and fulfill the creation mandate without even realizing it, searching for the Creator that they would not hear about until missionaries would eventually bring them the truth. That's all the time we have for today. See you next time. Have a great day.